also, we only have one topic for finalization. That's heritage resources. So let's see. I'm not sure we're going to need the whole 2 hours, but let's just dive right in. Hopefully, everyone got the agenda that Lisa sent around. And the first item on the agenda is actually a welcome, and some of you have met Shruti already. But Shruti, are you on? I don't see Shruti. Boy, I really messed that one up.
No, she's smart. She's hiding.
That's good. Well, for those of you,
Yeah, Shruti wasn't able to attend this evening. She had something else she had to do.
oh, that's right, Amanda. Thank you very much. Yeah, but we accidentally left her on the agenda. Well, anyway, Shruti is my wonderful new land use aide. And so she's been attending the topic staff discussions and is picking up support. We're very excited about having her on board. And of course, after Jose moved on to greener pastures. So, Amanda, thank you for reminding me that. Let's move into item number 2 on the agenda. As I mentioned, we are having, and Shruti's attending, and I'm attending, meetings of chapter leads and staff to work through specific language recommendations from staff. And St. Clair, if you could give us an update on where those are, and we'll probably be coming back to that some of those topics anyway in item number 4, which is identification of topics for finalization at next meeting. So St. Clair, go ahead and give us an update of each of the topic discussions.
Thank you, Supervisor Alcorn. So just to give folks an update, as has been mentioned, the staff leads have been having meetings with the various chapter leads to kind of go over the staff proposed draft and kind of go over differences, get feedback from task force leads on, any concerns, to move forward and see, as we move forward, are there any updates that staff can make based on these discussions. So, so far we have had meetings on the land use chapter. We have had meetings on affordable housing. And then last week there was meetings with the health subcommittee, also parks and open space, also transportation. They've been having regular meetings with staff to kind of go over those differences. And then I know actually tomorrow staff will be meeting with the equity subcommittee to discuss the equity draft and differences. And I know with some of the chapters, we have additional meetings that are being scheduled. I believe we have a meeting on Friday to further discuss affordable housing. And I know we are working on land use, I believe parks. There's some other topics where there are going to be additional meetings. So I think the meetings have been going well. Again, hearing just kind of what are the strong concerns from the task force as far as any of the differences, looking at where we can reach agreement on any of those differences, and identify if there are going to be any areas where maybe there might be some difference going forward, just so we can highlight those. But I think for the most part, the discussions between the task force leads and staff leads have been going well, getting a better understanding of things and what things the task force think that need to be addressed in the comprehensive plan. I think staff has also been agreeable to we had discussed before there might be some differences in format, and I think we're agreeable to look at just some of the suggestions that the task force has on format and things like that. So I think the discussions have been going well as far as kind of looking at all those things. As I mentioned, with some of those chapters, there are going to be some additional meetings to work through stuff. So as you mentioned, I think the key is going to be looking at what topics are ready for discussion. So really the goal is to have these chapter meetings to kind of have discussions, work out, discuss the differences, see where we can reach an agreement before coming to the larger task force to kind of finalize things. I think at this point, based on the discussions that have occurred, I know I've heard, there's been very good kind of discussions that come out of the transportation discussion and affordable housing. So I think as far as which topics might be ready to come to the overall task force, I think those are two topics that um, probably might be at the forefront of topics that are ready for the discussion. As you mentioned tonight, we are going to be discussing heritage resources. But as I mentioned, again, there are some of those key topics that will still need to come to the larger task force. So again, land use, health, parks and open space, equity, affordable housing. I think those are all some of the big topics that will, need some at least somewhat lengthy discussion with the task force. So I think the key is going to be looking at, with our current schedule, um, you know, how do we get through all those topics? I think just looking at what we currently have scheduled, I think there may be a need for additional task force meetings to get through those topics. So I think that's where we are. So again, I think the process has been going well. And staff is continuing to work with the task force to see, try to work out as many differences as we can.
Great. St. Clair, thank you very much. Appreciate that update. Before we talk any more about schedule, I just want to make sure, do we have any orphan topics? Were there any that weren't mentioned? Were there no meetings scheduled? Because I want to make sure everything's moving forward. St. Clair, did any come to mind or, oh, I see Tammy. Tammy, you got
Yeah, I
your
was
hand
gonna say, just was gonna say that's a good point. Yes, if there are any topics that weren't mentioned and any task force members, feel there's a need to have a meeting, yes, please just let us know so we can make sure they're all discussed.
Yeah, because I want to make sure we're covering everything. Tammy, are we missing anything?
Yes, absolutely. Public art, and that's relatively short and easy. Um, Bill is not here tonight. There's a huge RCC meeting immediately after this. I guess he's doing that. Um, so that I think will be ready to go relatively quickly. Environment is complicated. We have had one meeting that we will be having at least another meeting, if not two. And planning principles was not mentioned, and that sort of was wrapped into land use, but it is a separate chapter. So those are three I can think of off the top of my head.
Yep. Tammy, thank you very much. Thank you for mentioning, yes, environment. That's one I know, again, there has been some initial discussion with Joe Gurney. There
Right.
are additional meetings, yes, that are being scheduled to continue that discussion. So yes, those will be continuing.
Yeah.
And then, yes, planning principles and public arts. Yes, if there are differences that you discuss, we're happy to schedule meetings to discuss that.
Okay, and I would like to say something publicly, and Walter, I think you got this last time. You were a little bit mad at me at the beginning of, I don't even remember what chapter it is because we've had so many meetings, but the the staff and the whole task force has to understand that when chapters got their edits, our chapters were rewritten and we didn't get necessarily red lines. So the workload on task force members has been to recreate what the changes were. And we simply cannot do that when we're working, one person is working on so many multiple chapters. So we're working as hard as we can, as fast as we can. The staff, I think, is now aware that maybe the complete rewrite wasn't the way to go. And thank God there's been wonderful staff acknowledgement of that and sort of relaxing of some of this stuff. But we're working hard trying to get you where you need to go when you need to be there. So thank
Thank
you.
you, Tammy. No, I appreciate that, Tammy. And
And by
you're
the
right.
way, the staff didn't necessarily have the complete drafts with all, I know the Parks and Open Space, wonderful staffer. She didn't have the version with all the graphics, and therefore she rewrote stuff, but in the graphics, what she had rewritten was irrelevant because the graphics explained the text. So that was a wonderful meeting of the minds last time, and I think we'll go faster the next time because she now will have the graphics. So it's a two-way street of, I don't know why she didn't get a complete draft, but anyway, it's tough when we're virtually meeting, and we need to do that because everybody needs to see everything. You can't do that in one meet. Anyway, shut up now and let's go forward.
All right, thank you, Tammy. Now, good points, and I hope at this point, all the task force leads do have the red line versions of their chapters. I think that's the case, but let's make sure that happens because, as you said, Tammy, these discussions, I think, are extremely helpful in terms of identifying where there's misunderstanding, where there are just things that are really more in formatting, or like you said, that really can be bridged. The differences can be, and frankly, there are going to be places where there are still differences, but can really crystallize those into something that's that's much more understandable. So and ultimately, I think what we're seeing is a better recommendation, stronger overall as we go through this process. So thank you very much, Tammy, and everybody who's been doing this in St. Clair. And I know been lots
Might
of
be worth
discussions.
mentioning, Walter, John Carter.
Yeah, John, please.
So there are other meetings that go on as well. We had a meeting with the Chamber of Commerce today to talk about the plan in general. They were interested in the general topics, and of course, we couldn't go into a lot of detail with all that, but we did go into a lot of neat detail on the land use numbers, and we came to a reasonable outcome, I think, with the chamber on the numbers. So minor changes to the text. I don't know if Lynn Molston is on the phone, but she was there with Mary Maupin. So it was a good meeting.
Good. Fantastic. Well, thank you all. I think we've got, if there are no other orphan topics, I think we've got everything moving ahead, but let me just double check on public art. Okay, that's going to be Bill. Yeah, if I guess the question is,
Bill is on now. I think he can.
oh,
Bill
great.
just joined.
Hey, Bill. Bill, the question is, with public art, are there changes to the document that were recommended by staff that you need to have a meeting with staff about? Or is that something that's been worked out with you and others working with you on public art?
That was Tammy and me, and we actually haven't talked about that.
Okay, so you guys
I
talked.
don't think there was anything.
I think there was one sentence. I think we can get by it. So Bill and I will talk about that and let your scheduler know if we can be on the next Monday's agenda.
All right, that sounds great. And yeah, and if that sentence, maybe if you need a meeting or frankly, maybe an email to work through that or call. But thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Bill.
One other thing, Walter, just one other thing, sorry.
Yeah, sure.
The earned density. So
yes,
I've recorded all the things that the result of the last meeting, and I could send that in right away with a final draft of the whole thing.
Okay, no, that sounds great, John. I think I think the consensus was once we get, basically that would be last, let's look at everything, the totality of it, and then come
we
back
might
and
want to add or subtract to it.
exactly, right. So, and John, now that we have you there on planning principles, is there anything any staff feedback? Do we need to have a meeting on that, John? What do you think?
I think we got staff feedback on that.
Okay.
And you asked me to do a highlight section, which I haven't done quite yet. So the idea was to take the introduction, highlights, and history as one section. That's sort of the introduction, and then a separate chapter of the planning principles. So be able to send that on.
Okay. Fantastic. All right, John. Yeah, thank you. And I think that's underway then. And Lynn, I know you are working on land use. There's some back and forth on that.
Yep.
And then Tammy.
Yeah, and Walter, I just wanted you to know that that we have taken all of the staff comments from the land use markup, and we've created a reconciliation dashboard that we will be using to go through all of the big ticket items. And then I wanted to acknowledge receipt of an additional document that Bill Malin sent that had some of the high level items that we've gone through. At least I've had a chance to go through and address each one of those. And I really do appreciate their contribution and especially Bill's hard work on this. So I don't know if Barbara's on, but thank you or if Bill's on, but thank you.
Thank you.
Could I, Supervisor Alcorn, could I?
Yeah, Gary.
Economic development, we have been through that with the Chris Caperton and Charles Kapoor and I and John Carter, and we're finished with it. It's kind of ready to go. I'm not going to commit to next week without talking to Chris and Charles, but it's I think ready to go.
Very good. Thank you, Gary. Appreciate that. And check with Chris. And if you're comfortable after talking with Chris, bringing that to the June 13th meeting, let's try to do it then. But talk to Chris first. I realize we jumped into agenda item number 4, but that's okay. John Mooney, did you want to say anything about transportation? Are you going to be ready June 13th, you think?
We believe so. So we've had a series of meetings, had another good one today, very good collaboration, long-term collaboration between both the task force and the Fairfax County DOT contact groups. We got direction from the whole combined group today, and John King and I are going to be working on that, and we hope to be able to get out a draft, which will be very narrow differences. Some of them are strong differences, but very limited number, which we believe we'll be able to get out in time for the task force to discuss them on the 13th. And I intend to prepare an issues list so that we can go through the issues list rather than, scramble through the whole document.
Wonderful. John, thank you very much. And I, just as a reminder about the process, I think everybody is okay with this. What we're asking is for each of the chapter leads, after you've communicated with staff, after you've had any of these meetings, to bring basically the updated chapter back to the full task force and present it. That's what's going to be happening today. Chris is going to do that with Heritage Resources. But just so everybody understands, I think that system is working best so that we can be assured that what's coming from these meetings is reflective of at least the chapter leads and the chapter leads understanding, and then of course bringing it back to the full task force. So very good.
Last chapter that I didn't hear, and maybe it was me, public facilities. I don't know if you mentioned that.
No, that was not mentioned. Where is public facilities?
It's Charles Colby.
Reviewed and edited by staff. I reviewed it. I was okay with 95% of it, but I also sent back the staff with the comment. It had to do with something. It wasn't what they wrote. It was what the I guess the park authority wrote.
Okay.
So I had some comments. It's back to whether we want to be a sports tourism destination. It's a much more viable economic entity than tech headquarters and things like that. So I raised that question, but that reappeared and I just had comments about it.
All right, very good, Charles. Stay in touch with my office on that, or with Chris or St. Clair, and as you're ready, we'll make sure that public facilities gets on the agenda for the full task.
And if we can work on something, if it's just like inevitable, there's no way to just sidetrack it, then maybe just put some language in to make sure that it's done in a thoughtful way, get community feedback and so on, and
Perfect. No, that's good. And that may be an example where, maybe there's an option A and an option B, or this is the task force recommendation, and then maybe there's a text box that says staff is recommending this language as an alternative. I mean, if there's not a way to reconcile some of these, that's okay. I think we're making tremendous progress reconciling the vast majority of these issues, but there may still be a few things, and that's okay. So, great, wonderful. Thank you, Charles. And Tammy, thank you for flagging public facilities. Any other topics that we're thinking we're forgetting about or need more discussion right now?
So what are the topics next week? Transportation, public art, maybe, and what?
Transportation, public art, affordable housing, hopefully, and maybe economic development. We'll see with Gary, and possibly public facilities.
Well, that's a lot.
That is a lot.
Yeah,
So
let's not go crazy. Well, but we can't be here, 3 or 4 hours.
I agree. What I'm hopeful, Tammy, and we'll see, this will be a little test tonight, but what I'm hopeful is that the differences, the task force has worked through just about all these issues already, but hopefully the differences between staff and task force that come back in these updated chapters will be minimal, so they won't take terribly long for the task force to do final endorsements. But you're right, Tammy, we won't go nuts. We'll make sure it's doable.
So are we planning to do this next time, cover all of this next time, or spread it out a bit?
So what we'll do is get an update on the different topics that are still outstanding, and then go through and have a discussion, hear from the chapter leads on the topics that are ready to go next week. And hopefully we can knock one out tonight, and we can knock at least 2 or 3 out next week as well. And so, yeah.
Thank you so much. The other question, I'm very, very curious as to whether anyone worked on changing all of the curveball that we had last time. We were throwing a curveball at the very end. And what I mean by the curveball is that we no longer could say must. We had to have all of us shoulds, and then we were talking about changing that to it is expected. And a lot of people were very comfortable with that. And I'm just very curious as to whether that was taken up by anybody and whether that was incorporated in any of the new drafts.
Are folks seeing that in your drafts? Anybody want to comment on that? I know some of the drafts you haven't seen yet, or they haven't been updated.
I can say for land use that we are maintaining the will and must until the county attorney has a chance to weigh in.
Very good.
We used mostly should in transportation, with a few, 1 or 2, it is considered necessary.
Oh, good.
How about is to be expected? Did you do any of that, John?
No. It mostly should or is considered to be necessary. Tammy, there may have been 1 or 2.
Okay, thank you. We're trying to dance around that, Jan, without being autocratic. There are some things that absolutely have to be will and must. They're not negotiable as far as the task force groups working on them, but I can't say that for all of the task force, for all of the chapters, all of the time.
I think the offer, and I think it was Barbara Byron that that came up with the option of using verbiage that pretty much said it is expected that. So that would be our fallback.
Right. That's a good fallback too. I hope it does get used. It is a good one.
In economic development, we changed some of them to shall. What am I saying? Should, sorry. We changed some of them to should, but not all. I will say the last comp plan had 250 wills in it.
Good counting, Gary.
Took him all night.
All right. Any other comments or questions on all these topics? At this point.
Yeah, I think we're going to probably need to be able to see the final copy a few days in advance if possible, since this is, I guess, technically the final. So what's your expectation on when everything will be distributed?
Well, yeah, I guess what we'll need to do is obviously get through all these chapters and then a final and have one meeting for the task force to look over the final after all the chapters have been endorsed. So
I guess I
we'll
meant
just
for next week if we're gonna
for next week. Good question. Got it.
review chapters. Yeah, I'm just worried about that's a lot of chapters to read through.
Good question. So let's just go through and ask John, when do you think transportation might be ready for sending around?
I believe I can, it is my firm intention to have it done by Friday.
Wow.
So John King and I are meeting starting tomorrow to try to reconcile the few differences. But that is the goal.
Okay. All right. And how about affordable housing? Does anyone know? I'm not sure David's on.
I'm here.
Oh, hey, David.
Yeah, I just have my video off. I would expect that whatever needs to be resolved is resolved on Friday.
Okay, so on Friday, so hopefully it can be distributed Friday COB.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay, good. Please shoot for that if you could. That would be good. And then we're looking at, let's see, maybe public art.
Yes,
Okay.
that would be ready for sure by Friday. I don't think there were many changes. It's such a short chapter.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And then we still have possibly economic development and public facilities. So Michelle, we still have, I guess, does that sound reasonable if folks could get at least these larger chapters out by Friday COB?
That works for me. I think it's up to everybody else too, if that works for everyone else. I don't know everyone's weekend schedule.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll shoot for that, and also on economic development and public facilities, Gary and Charles, if you guys could do your best, if you could get it out by Friday if possible.
I think, Chris, you're on the line, right?
It's Chris.
Craig Caperton.
I am, Gary.
So they have economic development. I have some conflicts, and I'm on transportation, so it may not. Chris and I have to talk about this. But
Gary, do you have two devices open? There's a feedback.
one I'm not hearing from. So can you hear me now?
Yes, thank
Okay,
you.
sorry. So Chris and I will talk about whether we can do this next Monday, because I have some issues and I'm on transportation working with John. But we have that out. So I think that's not going to be an issue, but Chris and I will talk about those.
Okay, thank you. And I don't want to overwhelm the next meeting, but yeah, if we can get most of these moving forward and out by Friday, that'd be great. Okay, any last things on these topics? Okay, well, let's jump in. Heritage resources. Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you to summarize the chapter, any changes, and your recommendation.
Sure. I'll be very happy to. So everyone should have gotten it. It was sent out to the task force group. I'll say, I guess I'm being the guinea pig on some of this for this section, but I think this is a relatively easy one for us to walk through. Even when we voted on it, it wasn't too controversial, and we were able to tackle the controversial items. The draft that was shared showed the staff comments and then my responses. I met with staff last week, and they were accepting of pretty much all my comments to incorporate them. So there wasn't really much hemming and hawing back and forth. I think there were a few items that we definitely wanted to make sure we brought to folks' attention, and were a few that the staff had to do some touchback on just to make sure. Also, I want to defer to Sinclair or Chris Cape, or the other Chris too, just to make sure if that what I got from Heritage staff is accurate from that assessment right there. So Sinclair, Chris, feel free if you want to go, well, Chris, this item right here.
So I guess you just wanted to, I mean, I think what Heritage Resources shared with you and can you work before, I think, yes, that is kind of latest and greatest. So I think we're fine with moving forward with what you have. Is that what you were asking? Yes. Okay.
I will say, for those that didn't do a deep dive into it, the map that shows the areas in Reston that have been surveyed has been cleaned up to make it a little bit more digestible to the eyes. It was not, the last version was a little garish, I would say, so it was cleaned up there. There were a few places where the term mitigated was used when a heritage resource, and I'm going to emphasize that term, the heritage section applies to heritage resources. So just because something might be historic or eligible, unless it is on the county's inventory of sites, it's not a heritage resource, which means there are limited protections even under the comp plan that would apply. And so those are the properties I'm really talking about. And in Reston in particular, we're talking about Lake Ann would be one of the, obviously the most prominent properties, I think, folks, that would come to folks' mind. But in addition to that, we have the USGS, we have Sunset Hills, the Bowman Distillery site, Wheelie Town Hall, as well as the Wheelie Robert House, and Brown's Chapel. So those are the ones that are identified. There are plenty of other resources in the district that have been identified that could become ones that this could apply to in the future, but those are the ones that I'm speaking of specifically when I talk about heritage resources. And so what the plan kind of emphasizes is that if something like development is going to affect one of those, there needs to be consideration given to how that development will affect or impact, whichever term you want to use, those properties. And from my professional life, the way we like to say it is how we will resolve those effects. And then they go in this order typically: avoid, minimize, mitigate. So ideally, we want to avoid the effect if we can. If there's a way for the development or the change in the plan or rezoning to avoid, negatively affecting a heritage resource, let's do it if we can. If we can't, is there a way to minimize it? That could be incorporating the property into the new development. That could be design changes if possible. And last but not least, if we can't do that, then we want to mitigate it. That could be through documentation, that could be through interpretation. It's going to vary case by case in those situations. But a lot of the changes I put in there with staff was, let's structure this in a way that when someone reads it, it's not kind of chock-a-block. Instead, this is the order we want you to think about it, so that when development comes in that affects these, that staff reports to the supervisors can actually make sense on, here's how the development considered these things and where those options were. That was the biggest thing. I will say I also asked staff to make sure that any of the land use plan section language that spoke to Association Drive, that referred to how there is opportunity for tax credits if reuse and rehab are considered there, the language that is in here referencing them is identical or complementary, basically. I didn't want overlap if we were saying the exact same thing, but I also didn't want, conflicting language. So I wanted to make sure whatever comes through land use, and we had a small snippet in land use that basically highlighted these properties were identified as significant there are opportunities from a financial tax credits level for developers to utilize that if they want. Didn't say they had to, but said, hey, this is available. I think John Carter actually wanted to make sure in the heritage section we emphasize that here too. But my concern is, as a Fed, make sure there's consistency and not duplicity. Beyond that, I soapboxed on a section of language that I think kind of tied into the environment, community health, as well as equity. It's just a little bit of a grandstanding sentence. Basically highlighting that rehab and adaptive reuse of properties.
That's fine.
Hey, Charles, your microphone is on.
Oh, sorry, I had it in reverse. I thought I was
okay.
muted.
Basically highlighting that our buildings are resources. They are embodied energy. So saving them if we can, you know, and preserving a diverse collection of them actually is conducive to kind of preserving our past through preservation in some way. It's very flowery language, but I kind of stood with staff and said I really wanted it in here, so I retooled it a little bit to make it less grandstandy. And they've so far entertained me to add that. One more beyond that. I serve on the Architecture Review Board as chairman. There was a statement in there that encouraged development that might affect a heritage resource to seek the guidance and input of the Architecture Review Board if they so sought to. It was merely an offer. It is not a requirement again. But I will say we've had other districts and other projects that are not in overlay districts like Lake Anne come to the Architecture Review Board and seek the expertise, including our architects, landscape architects, historians, engineers, and architectural historians like myself, seeking our input on the project. Because obviously if they do come propose something that does require rezoning or does something novel, seeing that the ARB is supportive of it is very helpful for them, but not required. Staff relinquished on that point to me. And then last but not least, the last bullet in here is I think the one that's probably going to have the most discussion, or at least that's what heritage staff and I surmised. And that's why there are several members of the heritage staff on too. We have Denise Dressel, who is the heritage planner who advises the Architecture Review Board. We have Liz Kroll, who is the lead archaeologist for the County Park Authority, as well as I think, Liz, we may have Amy Wells on your deputy, I believe. If not, but we have staff from the Heritage Program on. But there was a lot of email traffic just recently. Oh, and we have Laura Arsenault as well. Sorry, so we got a lot of Heritage folks. There was a lot of back and forth about the Hunt Club and the cemetery near the Hunt Club and the activity going on there. I think the Heritage folks were able to provide some information on that, particularly that obviously the parcel is going through some changes of ownership, and there was archaeological survey work going on. But you know, from the outside observer perspective, one could definitely think someone might be bulldozing cemeteries. So they were able to provide some input on that. And we still have a sentence in there on that, but there was definitely a discussion about, is this appropriate? Are we covering and addressing all the concerns? And I mentioned to the heritage staff, I thought, make sure that's a topic today so that folks have questions. We have all the right resources here to answer them. So that's my, quick spiel on it. But, obviously I would entertain any input from anyone who's looked at it, or we can jump straight to the Hunt Club too.
Chris, thank you so much. Jan, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Has anyone ever, this is pie in the sky, and I've got another question really, but has anyone ever considered turning that back into a university? It was originally built to be a university, and then it ended up with associations. Has anyone ever thought about trying to redo that?
What I would say, Jan, is in my cursory, if you're talking about Association Drive, correct?
Yes, I am.
The owners, based on my understanding, at this point, don't seem to have that interest at this moment. Obviously, since it's, they're owned by those organizations. A similar situation with the API building and the American Press Institute, just, they didn't have an interest in keeping the building. And You know, unfortunately, when we get into those groups that, you know, if they don't have an interest, even though their building may be significant,
Right.
it
Yeah.
becomes who is going to own the property, and then what do they want to do with it. That's kind of the situation. I mean, obviously, I opined to the heritage staff folks. We talk about needing a new library in Reston. You got a great campus over there. You could build a beautiful library up there, you know. But the county just would have to acquire the property. You got manicured lawns and unique architecture. But you know, I don't know if I wanted to shoehorn that into land use. I thought I might be a little bit of a sleeper cell agent if I went that far.
Okay, thank you so much. The other thing is that you mentioned that you sort of are using soft words. You're not really coming on strong, saying that it's expected that you conserve this property, or it's necessary to keep the facade of this building if you decide to develop around it, or even as a building that's the focus, and then you go through that. Could be a clubhouse, whatever. But the language that you're mentioning is kind of a soft language, rather than how important it is to keep these. I mean, a big fan of heritage resources. I really am. And they fascinate me. And
Well,
I really would like to have them incorporated as often as we can get them to do it.
and as would I, and unfortunately, and this comes from the fact that I even work at the federal level with the National Historic Preservation Act. It
Nice.
says shall consider. Even in so much of the local and state legislation is all derived from that, done in 1966, and it really is a consideration. And I know, this is not the tool where I could make that change. If the county in its ordinance wanted to say you shall, you know, preserve heritage resources, and, you know, because at a local level you could do that. And I, you know, as a preservationist, trust me, there are many a building I would love to see, you know, stay, but I also recognize sometimes it's not feasible. So I may seem almost you know, stabbing myself for my own success, but that is kind of the world I operate in heritage resources, and in my larger job even, is we want folks to consider. And obviously, if there is a large local support for properties, then frequently the views of that change, because developers and even federal agencies too, when they propose projects that might affect properties that are significant, they realize it's going to be bad press or huge public outcry. They might suddenly try to find a way to do it. I can't guarantee that, though. I mean, I teach that on a daily basis. Is, you know, the outcomes can go from full preservation to full destruction. But I recognize, kind of maybe as a bit of a bureaucrat, that I can't get that language in here as much as I wanted in here.
Why can't you put in, you know, it is expected, or it is it strongly should be considered. It is expected, I think, is a good one. And then when we're earning density, when we're earning those points for those developers, this might be a great way for them to do it. And
it is, unless it fell off that list, it is in the earned density list of things that a project can do, is obviously rehabilitation or preservation of a heritage resource. And so for the handful of properties right now on the Reston comp plan, that if that makes it all the way through, that is something they could highlight as, you know, seeking earned density. We talked about the FAR solution. I think that was a little bit ambitious on my behalf, but like I said, I was reaching for everything I could find. I wish I could say expect it, but there just isn't the force of law to make someone do it. It just doesn't exist from a practical perspective.
But you're talking about federal. I'm talking about putting it in a document that is our Reston master plan. And I don't see why we can't put in it is expected or it is considered. Why can't we do that here? Just because the federal government's doing it doesn't mean that we cannot have stronger language in our document. We're not saying you must. we are coming down fairly strong on that it's expected that part of this natural resource be in a common visual state. I don't know why we can't change that.
I think well, and I recognize what you're saying, but it also isn't something that at local level, I think the county has the force of law to do either at this current point. I'm not the expert in, but I'm not going to speak to it. But what I will say is I rearranged many of these to emphasize the direction of that avoidance, minimization, and mitigation in that order. It shouldn't be mitigation first. It should be avoid first, minimize, then mitigate. But I don't know. I would turn to the heritage staff folks or the other folks that want to kind of answer the rest of Jan's question. I can't be the, I do this for my main job. I can't do your job too, though.
Very good, very good. Well, it's well done, Chris. I really am impressed with it. I just am kind of wanting a little stronger, that's all.
Jan, this is Laura Arsenault, Branch Chief of Heritage Resources Section. If I could add a little bit to Chris's language, and I agree, Chris did a great job on drafting the language for us with that little work on our part, so that was great. The comprehensive plan, I'm sure you guys have already done this. I know this is my first Reston Task Force meeting, but it's really a recommendation document. So it's not just heritage resources being taken into account with all these things. It's one of the factors. So as much as we would love to say you must, you shall, the comprehensive plan is simply not the place to do that. It's an advocacy and kind of awareness document that developers and the community can read to be aware of heritage resources that are known and identified or unknown and identified. But it allows us to be able to kind of insert ourselves as heritage resources staff when we find something that is from 1937, but not necessarily identified anywhere else. So it gives us that little bit of flexibility. The other thing is the property owner rights. We just can't, we don't have any enforcement in Fairfax County at this time to mandate someone to put something on the inventory of historic sites, for example. So that's kind of where I know the language is soft, but it's really just about as strong as we can possibly put without infringing on property owner rights.
And thank you, Laura. Thank you for that. And Chris, I see a few hands up. Gary, you want to go next? And then John Mooney and then David.
Thank you, Chris, for a great job, as Jan just pointed out. Going back, because she mentioned Association Drive and it was discussed earlier by you. I just wonder if that shouldn't really be in the Heritage Resources chapter. I know you said we've got references in the land use chapter, but why wouldn't we have that in the?
It is, Gary. It is that there is thanks to John Carter, there is one of his suggestions, I believe, is with Laura told me about it when I did my cross check on the versions, was it added a section. It's right under the section on Lake Ann Village Center. It speaks to what I was speaking to is I wanted to make sure this language, Matt, is appropriate with the land use language. I didn't want, obviously there's a lot of busy traffic and activity that goes on in this little area of South Reston. And I want to be certain that whatever guidance is being given here is consistent and is going to be only helpful for anything that's going to come here in the future. So I was merely opining on a dream I had one day of, hey, there's some nice buildings I like there. Can we put our library there? Also make my commute to my library even easier because I live down the road. So that's what I was getting at.
I was thinking about the comment you made relative to John, that we were just putting it in land use. So John, since you were referenced here, does this all make sense since that you were brought up?
Well, I think it makes sense. I just think we should look at the language in the heritage resources and make sure that land use, if it doesn't match, it at least is in sync with it. That's all. But yeah, it's mentioned, which was the main thing. I think there's a road conflict there too. I don't know if you put something in transportation, maybe not, but there is a.
Well,
Stone Drive goes over. Anyway, the main thing is to get these in sync,
Right.
which Chris has already mentioned. Yes, we want to do that.
I will say for the road side of things, the soapstone connector, the effects to those properties, that's been resolved through the required one, the regulatory process that has to consider the effects to it. If it hasn't already happened, I have to kind of keep distance from it because of my job. But the agreement that was executed to consider those properties, I believe, was either penned or is going to be penned if it hasn't already. So that's this is more, there are other buildings there that will not be lost due to the soapstone. How do we manage those? Just because a portion of a resource is lost doesn't mean that we wholesale write off, that there can't be other opportunities. That's what this language is doing. And it's kind of highlighting that because they are identified at a national level and a state level, there's there's tax credits to be earned if somebody chooses to develop them in a way that's sensitive to the properties. So
we get a 3-for-1 on that. We got heritage resources, land use, and maybe transportation. At least resolve. That sounds pretty good.
Chris, when does that mean that soapstone will break ground?
Now you got to talk to Fairfax County Department of Transportation on that. That's
Tom Basodny, the application has been submitted, meaning that from his point of view, that it's essentially approved to go forward. The last, parcel of money has been submitted, and he hopes that that'll be approved. So that's kind of the status of Soapstone. So it's got a lot of money coming its way, and it's believed that it's going to be approved. Of course, there's a lot of other roads in Reston that really need that approval, or of another subject, but like the town center underpass. But at any rate, just mentioning what Tom said.
Gary, thank you. Thank you, Chris, as well. We got John Mooney has his hand up, and then David Vanell.
Thanks, Walter. I won't comment on the substance. I trust that Chris will work out the best substantive position with the county, and I acknowledge that what I'm commenting on is what was posted prior to Friday when the new version went out. That's because I had to print it out so that I could take it with me on my trip. But I will say that what was posted as the staff in the staff consolidated version, I found the language much less precise and much more awkward stylistically than Chris's original document. So I hope if others share my view that has been changed, because I didn't think it was really good stylistically. I'm happy to send you, Chris, my comments, but I trust and hope you picked up those points. Thanks.
Thanks, John. And I hope I did. I tried to be forgiving to staff in the places where I saw they made changes to my words, but yeah, please send them over just so I'm aware.
Okay.
Sake.
Will do.
Okay, thank you, John. David, and then Tammy.
Chris, thank you very much. This is probably something that doesn't go into the comprehensive plan, but my concern is, and we've seen this a number of times before, how do we as a community, how does the county as a governing body accelerate the identification of places in Reston, in and around Reston, that are either potential sites or probable sites? Because as we all know, if it hasn't been identified, it's open season. And so I'm wondering, I don't think there's any way you can you can put that in the comp plan, but how is it that the county and the citizens here could push to accelerate the time frame that is needed to survey these sites, identify what the potential historic value of them are, and get it on paper so that they're better protected?
This is one reason why I loved being part of this task force, is I realized that I'm not crazy. There are other people in Reston who do care about this, because sometimes I feel like I frequently care about some of the properties in Reston a little too much. At least some of the heritage staff will think so when it comes to the architecture review board. So I will say there is some good news on that front. We just recently, Heritage got grant funding for another matching survey grant regarding modern architecture in the county overall, which would include Reston again. So we did that for Reston in the first place to do the last survey, and the state enthusiastically threw money at us because modern is very big right now. And we applied again for the county overall because we recognize that it's not just Reston. Fairfax has a lot of innovative architecture. So we got that matching. The other big thing that's going on is, and something that at the architecture review board level, is we've been advocating for Heritage to update its planning documents that help direct how it conducts surveys in the county. Because we saw those, this is another county document, as inadequate. The guidelines that the ARB operates under are from 1992. They are about to be brought into the current century. Because we just finished a major update of those. Some of the heritage plan documents are equally as old and need to be updated because they don't reflect both the current trends, the current diversity, the current makeup of Fairfax County. The Fairfax also got a recent cost share funding for survey work for African American resources in the county, which Reston is also a area for potential consideration. So what I will say when it comes to finding more, part of it is badgering your supervisor as well as advocating for those types of surveys, because I tried to shoehorn it into here. I did. And it got pushed out going, Chris, this isn't the spot. This isn't where this needs to be in the plan. So I continued to pursue where is it going to go. And I would let Laura, I think she might be able to talk about a few other places, but it's not going unnoticed. The other step is, David, is recent surveys identified things. But as was pointed out, they are not yet on the inventory. They are just considered potential for the inventory. The property owners or another individual has to do the nominations and submit them to the History Commission to be considered. So properties like the golf courses or the various clusters that were identified for potential consideration to be there, that requires an initiative putting them on the inventory to get that consideration. But Laura, I don't know if you have any other positive news to add on that front of survey efforts in the county.
No, the survey efforts are probably a more recent thing that we've started to do, that we've actually had staff and ability and awareness to be able to apply for and receive grants for this funding. There's only 4 Heritage Resources staff for the entire county, and we've been at 2 for the last 2.5, 3 for the last 2 years. Not complaining about that, but we just don't have the capability to go out, which is why we're usually there at the 11th hour after a developer's already made their plan, saying, wait, this building's from 1972. Please take some additional consideration. So the place for the advocacy and awareness, once again, is in the comprehensive plan. And that's why, for example, in the Reston, in the Heritage Resources section, you see the Fairfax Hunt Club, because it's not necessarily on the inventory yet, if I'm correct, but it is a site that we're aware of and that we would like additional work to be done. So the whole point is to get people to talk about it and to talk to Heritage Resources staff, and that's the goal of our Heritage Resources section, to be able to create that for discussion purposes moving forward on any development.
Another comment I added, David, to the staff version that I added recommendations to were, if there are properties that are identified as eligible, there should be consideration of actually designating them to the county's inventory. So we would encourage developers to pursue that designation, or property owners to pursue that designation when found. Or when development does identify a property and say they are going to change it some, well, let's recognize it for what it is. Yes, maybe we're going to have to do some design changes to it, or maybe it will be modified in some way, but let's give it the formal designation it deserves at that level. So the plan has those caveats in it that hopefully will help that too. And Laura's right, they have been short-staffed, and Not for background context, recently the ARB just added an entire neighborhood context of over 300 homes in Holland Hills in the Mount Vernon district as the newest historic overlay district for the county. That's massive. It is a massive collection of properties that was just added. Something that Reston has going for it compared to many other parts of the county is the Reston Association. And the fact that there is a lot of design review consideration given to changes to properties that fall within RA's purview. That's not something that happens in the rest of the county. So there is a lot of integrity to many properties in Reston, which is a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you want to look at it. But the area where we're trying to target right now is those industrial commercial properties that don't necessarily fall into that category. And obviously right now, given our current economic environment, are going through a lot of changes with folks deciding they're not needed or they need to undergo extensive changes, which might be, replacement.
You mentioned earlier that there are some buildings in Reston that are coming up to be on the historic register. They're not quite there, but they are getting to the age where they would be considered. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay, great. That's pretty much all. I rode across Association Drive, drove through there. Broke my heart because I used to work at one of those buildings, and when I saw the state that it was in, it could make you weep. It's just so sad. But anyhow, that's.
Well, trust me, every time I drive by Bowman Distillery, I'm really hoping Walter can find us a distillery to open up there and take that over again. I actually reached out to a friend who is the archaeologist for the company that now owns the brand. I said, hey, you've got a property that you don't own anymore up here in Reston. Could be a nice place. I can't do anything. I can't make that happen. But I mentioned it, and he is a bourbon archaeologist. Talk about a great career. But anyways, he brought this to his attention that the brand is actually still owned and that the building still stands. It's still a property that is, I would love to see redeveloped in a way that could recognize its history.
Very good discussion. And I would just also point out, Chris, after going through all this process, this also may be an area appropriate for a follow-on motion of some sort, particularly around some of the identification issues you were just discussing. So keep that in mind too. Tammy, your hand is up.
Thank you. Two things. We were talking about a 3-4 on Association Drive. Make that a 4-4. Larry Butler brought to my attention that area has specimen trees that are not equaled in Reston, and that is a concern. And I'm not sure we even have that listed in our environmental chapter. It's maybe not appropriate, but I laud Larry for calling that to my attention. The other part of my question was, Chris, can you give us and staff an update on the cemetery at the Hunt Club?
Sure.
I'm getting calls on that from people who are just freaking.
Well, I'm going to touch real quick back on what you mentioned about association, just because what's interesting about that site is it's not just the buildings, it's the landscape. So there is some correlation there, and the fact that is a very uniquely designed space. Back in the day was probably very enjoyable. I get the impression from the current associations that teachers aren't a happy lot right now, sadly. So COVID and everything, but I would definitely either Denise Dressel or Laura or Liz Kroll, who is the Fairfax County Park Authority archaeologist. All of them could definitely give a great update on the situation going on there, because there were several site visits conducted and could maybe provide some context as to what's going on for everybody.
Thanks, Chris. Could you talk about the cemetery?
Right, for the cemetery. Hi, this is Denise Dressel. And I'm actually going to ask Liz Kroll, who is the county archaeologist, the branch manager for the Park Authority, to chime in, because she is definitely the person in the know about the cemetery.
Hi, everybody. I can give you the background on the cemetery and what's been done so far. As part of development plan review, when the developer came forward, archaeology, and just so you're aware, although we are housed under the Park Authority, we're responsible for archaeology both on parkland and countywide. So when the development plan review came through, we made a recommendation that they needed to conduct a cemetery delineation. The developer contacted us, and we had a Teams virtual meeting online with them and gave them parameters of what it was that we were asking for them to do. They hired a professional archaeological organization, Dovetail, out of Fredericksburg, and they have a huge amount of experience in cemetery delineation. I know because I talked to a whole number of people that there was a concern because prior to Dovetail's work, they had some folks out there doing some bush hogging of the property, which is cutting of, heavy vegetation. It was heavily overgrown, and there was no way that anyone would have been able to get in there to do any archaeology at that point. We received calls from Mary Lipsey from the Fairfax County Cemetery Preservation Association, as well as a number of citizens with regard to the cemetery. Amy Wells on my staff, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight because she's ill, she went out to the field and met with the archaeologists there. Also, local citizens who are archaeologists who live in the community also visited the site and did not, they felt that the brush removal had not disturbed, done any ground disturbance in the cemetery. Dovetail was out there. They conducted a cemetery delineation, and they are in the process of preparing an archaeological technical report, which will come to us for review. And at that point in time, we can make recommendations for that particular cemetery of, as far as, whether fencing it or whatever else. But that's where we are right now. So that's the background. And if you have any further questions
So,
at this point in time.
Liz, I think I've got a few clarifications that maybe even the heritage folks could help that I'm
Okay.
assuming some folks might have. Is one, obviously, the delineation process is something that's very standard when this kind of situation happens, because obviously the owner is going to want to know what are the boundaries of this cemetery, and part of this relates obviously beyond even county is state law, and state law governing cemeteries and such, that information is going to be really vital. And so what we have right now in the language here is obviously consideration about the cemetery being preserved and following state policies and procedures. And I think maybe if you or Laura could talk a little bit about that and what kind of protections there are for cemeteries in Fairfax, and particularly, obviously, we're talking about this one, and what happens next, so that folks understand. And is there anything we need to be saying in here beyond this? Because I think the only thing that was brought up as a potential conversation point for this cemetery in particular was the consideration of recommending buffering around the site. But this is something that obviously, is going to be really dependent upon what that survey information informs. So if I hit you with too much, what does the state require of us, and what can we expect next once following the delineation? You mentioned things like fencing. How does Heritage and your office help work with that?
Well, again, Chris, that would come back to us because we deal with cemeteries. Archaeology does. Once we get the findings of the report, we would make and we deal with Joanna Wilson Green, who is with Virginia Department of Historic Resources, with regard to cemeteries. But what we do is, we're following the, the protocols for, for, the what would be recommended as far as cemeteries are concerned. And currently, archaeology is participating in a process. There's somewhere between 350 and 400 cemeteries in Fairfax County, and we're conducting an inventory, which includes an on-the-ground going out to the different cemeteries. But once we have the boundaries of the cemetery, see what's presented to us, then we would go forward and make sure that within any mapping and things like that, that the cemetery would be, would be acknowledged, et cetera, because there are various different data areas right now where you can identify where cemeteries are, but we would make sure that it showed up on county GIS and things like that for future consideration.
Well, thank you, Liz. Yeah, we need to move on, but Tammy, go ahead.
Yeah, one more thing. What about the Hunt Club building itself? That's historical for sure. We were under the impression, we citizens who were interested in this site, that the back meadow was going to be allowed to be developed, but the front of that lot, including the cemetery and the actual building and the parking lot, would remain functional and available and preserved. And I saw the layout of the development proposal, and that is not happening. That is not happening at all. So I'm like, what about the Hunt Club itself? Do we know, Chris, anything on that?
I would look to Laura, Denise.
Sure.
You know any info about the Hunt Club itself? My understanding that it's not a list identified as a heritage resource, is it? Or is it not in the Reston, and that's part of the problem?
Well, it is identified in the comprehensive plan as being eligible for the inventory of historic sites. So it's sort of in this gray area where it's not actually listed on the inventory, but it is identified in the comprehensive plan as being eligible for listing. So we have recommended preservation of the clubhouse, of the yeah, well, let's call it a clubhouse, the Fairfax Hunt Club. I don't see any language that supports what you were saying about the meadow, the back meadow being preserved. There is supposed to be a 1 acre. The Hunt Club is supposed to remain on 1 acre of land to allow for the preservation of, as much as we can, its rural landscape, so that it should sit on a 1 acre lot.
Okay, well, I mean, it then will be a vacant building with no access and no purpose, and that's really tough to keep alive. Once you abandon a building and it's not heated and used, I don't know, sort of like a hollow.
It's one of those problems, Tammy, we run into if we don't have, I mean, obviously, if an owner is not pursuing to do something with it, or if if it's not actually going to be lost, then even then we have very little, just as a legal perspective, teeth.
I think we'd like to continue that discussion with the developer, though, to see what use we could find for it.
Yeah, I mean, I have actually been in that place at events, and it's it's a shame that Fairfax County Park Authority, it's just immediately north of Lake Fairfax Park, didn't take that property. The meadow, the vegetation in the meadow itself is fabulous, but they could have made a paying gig out of that place. It has a full kitchen that is a caterer's kitchen. It's antiquated, but it's awesome. And the ambiance in there, it's intimate, it's gorgeous. It's a log cabin with a big meeting room attached. It's beautiful. So, and parking is available. So it's just a tragedy that has gone away. So thank you.
All right, any more discussion about heritage resources? Any more questions for Chris? Any more comments? I don't see any hands up.
And I guess, Walter, I'd ask the question of if I think I didn't hear anything that was pushing for significant revisions. I know John mentioned some comments he might suggest that might make some further text tweaks based on his reflection of staff changes. But how are we handling this since I'm kind of the first, one of the first few folks at the gate? It seems like I was not hearing a lot of grumbling against it. So this seems like something that might be okay to move
Chris,
forward.
I don't think this is going to be a problem for this, but Chris, why don't you make a motion that the task force endorse the final version of the chapter with the understanding that there may be some slight stylistic changes as recommended by John Mooney in the final version that's compiled for task force recommendation.
I'd be overjoyed to.
Okay, so Chris
Supervisor, I move that the task force endorse the heritage section with the revisions proposed by staff and the updates proposed by me following this discussion.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second?
I think I saw Charles
Second.
second it with a hand and Michelle verbally.
All right, Charles and Michelle, any discussion?
This is David Gill. How
Hey,
much outreach has there been to the owners who might be identified as eligible being added to the inventory?
Well, the county conducted a lot of public outreach regarding the survey that was conducted. But
Right.
One thing that was done regarding the map showing the survey is that it isn't showing individual properties. It is just showing blobs on the map. So beyond the public sharing of this plan, this map has been shown before, or a version of this has been shown in the past, but there isn't any actual address information being given. That was a concern. We didn't want to do that.
Understood. Thank you.
Tammy?
I would like to point out on the Fairfax Hunt Club, it is not within the Reston boundary. It touches the Reston boundary. It is an orphan property that was assigned to us because it's in no other comp plan area. So it is included in the Reston comp plan. It's not an aberration. It is actually one of the properties that we have been asked to take into the plan and deal with.
Well, and we have it adopted in here. It is in here, so we'll carry it
I just
along.
want, people were like, it's not in Reston. Well, yeah, it's in our comp plan assignment. So.
Yeah, thank you, Tammy. Any other questions, comments on the motion?
Lynn.
Yeah, I keep coming back to the fact that we are a planned residential community, and the use of will and must as it pertains to a PRC, which is different than the TSA portion. I want to make sure that we're not missing out on, further protecting the PRC by using those terms if the county attorney comes back to say that is acceptable.
I shall give myself to the rulings of the county attorney on what my wills and musts and shall say.
Thank you.
That's all
yeah, that's all I'm asking. Yes. Thank you.
Chris, you're the best. Oh God.
All right, thank you. Gary, I see your hand up.
Oh, I'd had it up earlier. It was a bad time. I was just going to ask Chris, talking about the distillery, just remind, where's Bowman House in all of this? Kind of an off the wall, inappropriate at this time question. Hand was up earlier.
I mean, it's identified as a heritage resource. If you're talking about, if it depends on how you're referring. If you're referring to Sunset Hills and the A. Smith Bowman House, then it is identified as a heritage resource and is currently in good ownership, is what I would say. That is an example of a property that AFMA, when they've proposed changes, they've come to the ARB in the past and sought our input.
Chris, they also had a proffer to requiring them to do so.
Yeah. I didn't want to beat them up on that, Laura.
Sorry.
But they enthusiastically came to us with
They did.
ideas. They did not just show up grumbling, because we have properties in the county that are required to come see me and my fellow board members, and you could tell that they are being dragged there like my 4-year-old. They came there and they really value the property as a site that, when families have to come deal with the unfortunate purpose of their agency, that structure is a much more comforting and much more like, just kind of feels more like a home as opposed to a commercial structure. So they value it. So I think if anything, that's probably one of our properties that's in the best hands, honestly.
Thank you.
Chris? This is Charles. I hate to even bring this up because it might give someone a good PR opportunity, but I'm just mentioning that the people who own the golf course, one of them's a distiller, or a brother of a distiller, but I think they're all kind of connected. It's the Under Armour folks. They have, what is the brand? It's the Sagamore Creek. They actually have a distillery in Baltimore.
There we go. There's our opportunity.
Yeah.
Michelle, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Chris because this is so important to our community and you have done so much work on your own. And we're just incredibly lucky to have your knowledge, your experience, and your advocacy on an issue that I think we all care about deeply. And so I just want to express my extreme gratitude. And I hope our community is aware of all that you've done. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Michelle.
And John Mooney, I see your hand up.
Just before the vote, I wanted to repeat that as previously, I'm going to abstain from voting, despite my great admiration for Chris's work. The Reston Board of Directors will vote. Thanks.
Okay, very good. At this point, I'm going to use the chair's discretion in the meeting and just ask if there's any task force members who wish to be recorded as voting either no or abstaining on the motion. And you can either
assume other than John, who we would count already.
That's right, other than John. If you want to just verbalize that or put it in the chat here in the next 10 or 15 seconds. And apologies as I do this, but frankly, we got to figure out how to do the voting. Jose was really good at that. So this is a workaround.
Hands up and counted them. Hands
up. I know, but at this point, I don't know if we'll have any nays or abstentions. I just wanted to check.
Well,
Wait,
then it's easy.
That's a good way to do it.
Chair's discretion.
I won't have any hurt feelings if you got to name me. That's okay.
All right, I see no, I see and I hear no opposition or abstentions other than Mr. Mooney's. All right, with that, the motion carries. Okay, Chris. Very
Bravo,
well done.
Chris.
Well done.
All right, if only we can get the next ones go so easily. I can only I send that positivity to each of the next ones coming along the line.
Thank you. We need it.
Thank you very much, Chris. All right, fantastic. Well, thank you all, and Chris, thank you for being the guinea pig on this. We had spoken about agenda item 4 already. I believe we had identified those topics for the June 13th task force meeting, as well as when, at least for 3 of those topics, we were hoping to get the drafts sent around to the task force by Friday COB. Any final questions on agenda item 4? That's the June 13th meeting.
That's also a 5 o'clock meeting.
It is. It is, team. Yep. Okay, and then let's go to agenda item 5, which is more of an FYI at this point. We have a public engagement schedule started starting on July 11th, which is only a little more than a month away. And before we get into this, and I realize this might be a stretch at this point, but let me ask St. Clair if you're on, in terms of staff development of outreach materials for public engagement, how much time do you need from, say, the task force finalization of their recommendation before you'll have outreach materials ready to go?
It's hard to give an exact amount because again, it's going to, we'll have to review it. It has to go through senior staff review. I would say, I think we would need probably at the very least, it'd probably be at least 2 to 3 weeks at the very least. To be able to review and prepare something that would be ready for distribution. But again, I would defer to senior staff that would be able to have better feedback on that. But I would say that that's a minimum.
Okay. With that in mind, I think what we want to do is move this discussion about our initial public engagement, and actually it won't be the initial public engagement, it'll be public engagement, to next meeting. So let's come back, and I think at that point, perhaps we'll have a better sense of how fast the chapter meetings are going and how well they're going, and can perhaps look again at the schedule. St. Clair, does that sound reasonable?
Yes, I think it's really going to be a matter of seeing how we get through the topics, and if additional time is going to be needed. I think that will dictate when we'll be able to have something ready to distribute to the public.
Tammy.
Yeah, I just hate to say this, but oh boy, June and July, August, public engagement, not great timing because most people are not around, or a lot of people are not around.
Yeah, that's bad timing. Bad.
So I hate to say that because I know we're under a crunch, but that's the reality of our society.
No, you're right.
September would be better.
So Supervisor Alcorn, the other thing I think is putting this together in one document, because it's important how this appears. We've got some work to do after we get through these chapters to consolidate this into one nicely presentable document for outreach, and a little presentation we would probably have to do as a task force.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. And I think actually that is one of the things St. Clair was thinking as well, is pulling together basically a presentable with graphics, full document, full recommendation from the task force. St. Clair, do I have that right?
That is correct, yes.
Yeah. So Gary, I think that's part of the concern too on the staff side.
But he's got to have that before he goes to senior staff, I think. So we've got some pulling together before he has a time frame, I believe.
Right. No, I think you're right. All right, we will come back and talk about schedule next month. Appreciate everybody's feedback right now. And yeah, this is, we are struggling a little bit with our schedule, but I don't want to be a downer because frankly, I think the meetings are going very well. So let's keep that going and move through those issues as we have been. So thank you all for doing that. Are there any comments or questions before the task force this evening, before we break?
Just since I talked about Chris Caperton, I want to thank him for all the cooperation and help and support on economic development.
All right. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Chris. And thank you, St. Clair and Barbara and everybody on staff who's working through this. And thank you everybody on the task force. This is we're getting to the final stretch here. So thank you all for pulling together and pulling this off. So, all right. If there's no more business before the task force, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Walter.
Thank you, Walter. Great job again, Chris.